questioning here for a minute, but there's a lot of us on the stage, so I'll try and keep it brief. But I thought I would open with a small reflection on the voice as an instrument, and the strangeness of the voice. The voice has been sort of a perplexing phenomenon for philosophers and musicians over the centuries, right back to Plato, who felt that the voice was somehow an imprint of the soul, that it somehow indicated some really real essence of the self, that it was kind of a signature into, or sonic signature into the deepest part of ourselves, which later, with people like Schopenhauer and Nietzsche, became a kind of, one might call a sort of forerunner to the unconscious, that the voice had some sort of privileged relationship to the unconscious. But of course it's a very strange phenomenon, the voice. Where is the voice? Is it in the belly? Is it in the throat, the glottis, the mouth cavity? Is it in your eardrum? Is it a missile projected between the two? It sort of oscillates between these two material points. And then not only does it oscillate between these two material points, but also between material and meaning. And this is one of the first dilemmas that I thought I'd put onto the table, and that's the question of meaning or words as they intersect with music. I know, Ned, you've spoken a little bit. Ned Roram, is he here? No.
Oh,
sadly. Well,
who's referencing?
Oh, look, you thought I would have got it on? 40 years old. Ned Roram, who we had two pieces of his, actually reflected on it very nicely. He pits himself against, the figure of Pierre Boulez, who took very seriously the idea that music must trump the scene and not that the word should not dominate. The issue of word and music has long been a debate. And he argues that Boulez sort of frames the music and frames the word and almost crushes it, overwhelms it in a way. And that he felt in his work he should let it be free and in some sense natural in a way that Rousseau would have thought. Don't rush the tempo, don't slow it down too much, don't repeat anything that the poet hasn't repeated and so on. These things have been sort of worked out and leave it more or less intact. So I was wondering if we could sort of go through and think about how it is that you put words to music and why, and what sort of relationships you might be thinking about, whether the recitative kind of mode or whether the aria mode. We have some of that division of labor in some of the works, but we also have a lot of in-between concepts that are not quite captured with that dichotomy. And just to give us a sense to start thinking about your compositional process. And before you do that, for my sake, if not for everyone else's, you could just briefly introduce yourself, starting with you, David, and let us, so that we all know who's who in the room, and then a small reflection on your relationship to the voice through music and sound. Why the voice is so important for you as a composer.
I'm David Del Tredici. Well, I don't know, that's too high-minded for me. What I think is interesting is to be singing about gay subjects. For me, that was a thrill. To sing the unsingable, because no one's done it before. To sing, like many of the texts that were sung tonight, it's thrilling just because of that. And that drew me to setting lots of gay poetry. In that, since it's forbidden, there's no standard for how it should be set. Love songs, everybody knows how to set love songs, angry songs, faithful songs, but to set a gay poem, something which is not even, a gay person is not even an acceptable human being a lot of times, to set their poetry and to write about them, or sing about them, write music around them, gives me new ideas. It's never been done, so you get to do whatever you want. And a composer always wants to do whatever he wants to do. He wants to be, this is me talking. I feel that way. I never want to be reined in. I like always to feel like I'm doing something nobody did before, and certainly gay texts feed into that most effectively and beautifully.
You're a tough act to follow, dude. I'm David Leisner. At least partial answer to your question, Martin. I do my best to strive to maintain some sort of balance between having the music have its own life and serving the poetry in some way. It's a very tricky balance. I probably never achieve it, but it's what I strive for. It's different, I think, very much different than what David does In a way, I was thinking while I was listening to David's songs, how almost the text could almost be anything. It's David's music, no matter what. You know it's David's music. In my own music, I think it's a little dance with the poet. Maybe sometimes giving more preference to him or her than shining the spotlight more on me, and it goes back and forth like that.
My name is Ned Rora. Also known as Glen Roven. And I think I'm a words guy. I think that to me is the most important, more than the music. It's funny, because the song that they sang tonight was actually written for two guys, and Michael wanted to do it with man and woman. I said fine. And it was the first time I heard it. And they brought more of the music than I thought I put into it. They really killed it, and I thought the singers really did it. And I'm a big, when I write art songs or set poetry or even the other stuff, to me, words. I want to convey the words. And the music is just what I do. That's what I do for a living, and that's what I have to do to get paid, which is great. So that just comes out. And that's my service. If I was a painter, I'd be painting. But to me, it's making those words communicate to the people. That's why I'm also a big fan of opera in English opera, American opera, talking about it. I think if Mozart was alive today and saw his words, his opera being performed in language that the audience doesn't understand, he'd be saying, you're crazy, what's going on? So, saying it again, words to me.
I'm Ben Moore, and bravo, Michael, it was fantastic what you did. I think for me, so many different ways I approach text and music. It depends on what mode I'm in. I mean, sometimes I'll have what I think is an exciting musical idea, and I search for the words that will sort of go with that music. I've done that maybe 30% of the time. And then other times, I'm searching the text and just waiting for some musical inspiration to come from the text. Usually I memorize, if it's a poem, I memorize the poem and just keep it going through my mind, because a good idea never comes to me when I'm trying. It just I always have to be doing something else. I can bang my head against the wall of the piano, and then it's like the next day walking around town, it's like, that's it. But whatever it is, the word to me has to be set with the right conversational impulse. Even if it's an extended phrase, it's got to have the right emphasis on the right syllable. I know you can make a case for mixing it up sometimes, but for myself, I want to hear it the way you speak it and the way it's communicated in speech.
My name is David Sisco. To your question about why the voice, to me it's the most vulnerable instrument. There's something I teach voice at Marymount Manhattan College for the musical theater program, and there's something so vulnerable about helping students to let their sound out, and because for singers it is their identity, and to kind of put that out on the stage for other people, I think it builds a bridge that we can't get to in another way, and there's something really powerful about the voice, and so as a singer I'm certainly drawn to writing for the voice. As far as process, I wish I could say I was objective about how I pick my poetry and my text. I go through tons of things and just pick what initially kind of I respond to, and then from there I just read it aloud several times before I even do anything, and I come up with musical ideas based on that, the natural rhythm of the poem as I see it, and get a sense of where am I taking time in the phrase, where am I pausing, what feels right, kind of dramatically, and then trying to bring that into the music.
My name is Eve Buglarian, and the songs we did tonight, Mary did tonight, are part of a larger project that's translation, adaptation, response to the chansons of Benitez of Pierre Louis. which are fake lesbian poetry, written by a man pretending that he discovered them in Greek poetry, but of course he wrote them. And so, in a sense, what I was trying to do was give voice to authentic lesbian experience in the context of what started out as fake lesbian poetry. You know, in terms of text setting, I'm totally embedded in trying to tell this story in as authentic a way as I can. So I don't know if that answers your question. That's what it was about.
Hi, I'm Ricky, Ian Gordon, and I didn't have any music at this concert, so I feel funny saying it. I'll say that I write for the voice, but my mother was a singer, and I played for her, and I was always in love with the voice. So in some ways, and I feel in a way everything I do, whether it be picking poetry, setting poems to music, is autobiographical for me. I feel like I have a need to connect, and consequently, I feel like I'm always telling my story, whether it be through someone else's words or my own, which Green Sneakers is my own text. But it's that simple, really. I mean, and I read a lot of poetry, but I suppose I would have to be honest and say I set the poems in which I feel like I'm telling my own story. And that's my aim.
I'm Paula Kimper, and I really think of music and words on a continuum, that they're both languages, and that music is a language which is much more abstract and open to interpretation by who's hearing it. And words, while they are open to interpretation, they're not as open to music. They're the words, they're the story, they have a language, they have a context. So I often will start with just the words and listen to whatever music language that they are a part of and try to bring that out. Story is very important to me. The songs tonight are part of an arc of a story. I write operas. I don't really write purely instrumental music that much because the words and that part of the range is very important.
One other way into music I was thinking might be fruitful is to consider the question of style and how one locates oneself as a composer, which sort of vectors of tradition sort of pass through your music that you will come out of. Since David's on my right, maybe we can start there, since the story for you was more or less somewhat embattled relationship that sort of a neo-romantic sound, if you like, grounded in diatonic tonal harmony, enriched, of course, diatonic harmony had at that point for you. If we go back to the mid-70s or so, when we had a kind of institutional setting that was perhaps differently directed, and that in some ways the tonal language for you was a kind of coming out as well, or an assertion of difference in a context that one might describe as sort of institutionally, sort of in a kind of inertia around serialism and 12-tone music and so on and so forth. This tradition seemed to have a lot of play at that time, and in some ways.
Now that's a question close to my heart. I like that very much. Yes, it was when I got tonal from a world of, when the world was really totally atonal, or at least the meaningful world, the world around universities was so tonal, so atonal, and I loved it myself. That when it was gradual actually, but the piece that was most tonal was heard first by the most people. So it seemed as though I suddenly went tonal. Halfway through writing that piece, which was called Final Alice, I had a nervous breakdown, musical nervous breakdown, and thinking, if I keep writing like this, all these patches of tonal music, people would think I was crazy. But before this, I would write a certain amount of tonal music, and then a wrong note would come in, or sort of a scrim of wrong notes, and you'd hear the tonality from afar, as it were. And that was somehow still acceptable. but to have no scream of wrong notes, to just have bald, tonic, dominant harmonies sitting there. And I waited, you know, I wrote the piece in 2 years. I waited after about 1.5 years for the wrong notes, which never came. That's when my nervous breakdown came. But I thought I could either, where can I go? I have only my instinct, which was as happy about the tonic and the dominant as it used to be about the minor 7th or major 9th. It was the same enthusiasm, which has shifted to this strange new area. I said I have to go with all a composer has, which is his instinct. And I finished the piece, and with Fear and Trembling, it went before the Chicago Symphony, and you know, became was a big hit, and all of that, which shocked me. You know, it was just I could not believe. I was worried that I would be made fun of by my colleagues, who were my only audience to that point, not the big audience that didn't exist for me. So I'm glad I went with my instinct, and I learned a lesson. And you have to go with your instinct. You have a composer has nothing else. And wherever weird it goes, and hopefully it goes in a really weird place, because what is weird one day is love the next.
It's interesting because that was the year 1976, I think, when that was premiered, which in the sort of history of Western music over the 20th century was an important year in many respects. And it was the same year that Einstein on the Beach, Philip Glass's Einstein on the Beach was premiered. Steve Reich writes music for 18 musicians. So all these sort of non-serial composers sort of step up and start to write large-scale works, and there's a sort of moment
and it was a time of such violent differences. Just the people you mentioned were so incredibly different. So it was a fresh breaking out of the tonal world, atonal.
And your music there too is inflected tonally, one might say. That first song we heard, that strange, surreal kind of poetry, in some ways gentle, surreal.
Yes.
Poetry, which is also kind of grounded in. It's almost like it's almost like a two-part invention. The way you treat the piano, it's kind of baroque. It touches